So I'm happy to introduce the next speaker, which is myself. I'm going to talk a little bit about in-field observations from the INLOC Group, and over the last kind of reporting period, or the last 6 months, so from July to December 2020 in that way. So both myself, and INLOC is new to the game, although some of the staff and so on has been there for a very long time. Okay. And also want to thank the Crown of Thorns Starfish Control Program. It's funded by the partnership between the Government Reef Trust and the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, and delivering between the partnership between Gubrumpa and RRRC. At INLOC, we have 3 vessels. We have Hero, Tura, and Venus, and together we did 32 voyages and over 331 days over that 6-month period. They completed about a little bit more than 3,600 hours of Cots control activities, and they culled, or not culled, they culled a total of 13,841 Cots over 3,090 hectares of reef. And they covered the ground of 67 different reefs during this time. And these 67 reefs, so these are 64 reefs that are our priority reefs, and 22 of them are by the end of the period, they were in 22 of them were in proactive monitoring management mode. 23 reefs was culled below the threshold and established in the threshold achieved management mode, and 19 still remains in culling underway management mode, with 3 reefs that are non-priority reefs in that way. We have a few success stories, and these are the ones that stands out fairly clearly. So the Big Broadhurst, Fitzroy, and the Round Russell Reef. They were manta-towed to be in potential outbreak status, and after repeated culling over a few voyages, they were culled down to a no outbreak status in that way. Staff is also providing a lot of research support, 120 hours during that 6-month period in collecting Cots underwater, maintaining them alive on the boats, and then sending them to different research organizations. They also did a lot of tube feed collections and, of course, plankton tow in that way. Because we have so many reefs, we covered, or INLOC crew covered 67 reefs during that period. I've divided into northern reefs and central reefs, and we will just talk a little bit about the contrast between these two areas in that way. And on the left-hand side, you have the graph that we have manta-towed, so we have hard coral cover, and we have the different management mode is the colors of the bars. So the green ones are threshold achieved, the blue ones are proactive monitoring, the red one is culling underway management mode, and the 3 purple ones, there are the non-priority reefs that's been undertaking. And we see that a lot of the northern reefs, that one of them that sticks out, the 2 islands that are having more than 40% coral cover. The rest of them are, around the 20% and less mark. On the right-hand side, we have actual Cots culled from the reefs that goes from Lizard Island down to Cairns. So we have Lizard Island at the top on both of the figures, and Arlington down at the bottom of both of the figures. I've color-coded the cohorts of Cots that have been culled at these reefs. So the smallest one, they are blue, so they are the ones that are less than 15 centimeters. The green ones are Cots in cohort 2, that's between 15 and 25 centimeters in diameter. Red is 25 to 40 centimeters, cohort 3, and the 4 is orange, which is the largest one, Cots over 40 centimeters in diameter. We can see that up towards Lizard Island, up in the top part there, they culled a few larger Cots, and still less than about 20 individuals per reef, but up there it was mainly larger. And then with coming down the gradient of the reef, we see that the Cots get smaller and smaller. And down at Michaelmas, which they called the most Cots, there was about 100 individuals. Majority of them, or more than 80%, were in the smallest category 1 in that way. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that we have a few big ones up there in Lizard, and then as we go down, they get smaller and smaller in that way. For the next figure, I'm going to show you a little bit about manta-tows and reefs and Cots dive CPUE. And then the last figure is number of Cots culled. So in the first figure, we have the reefs on the y-axis going from Lizard Island down to Arlington. And we have put it in the proportional graph, so it's up to 100%. The blue fields are when we haven't found any Cots scar or any Cots during a manta tow, whereas the red field in the manta tow is when we have found Cots scar or observed Cots there. The same for the rhesus, is that the blue fields is where we haven't observed anything, and we have a few sites that we found Cots when we did rhesus in that way. And then when it comes into cull dive CPUE, blues are still 0, that we haven't found a single individual. The green ones is when we have culled that site or that dive under 0.035 in CPUE. And the red site is when the site has been culled at 0.04 or higher in CPUE. And why I took the 0.035 is making sure that we can, I wasn't too close to the 0.04, so anything that's been 0.035 I upgraded to 0.04 instead. So it's only one site or in one area there in Mikkelmas that we had culled at 0.04 for a few sites there, and that was maximum up to 100 individual on that reef itself. So, and it is a good contrast, because what I'm going to show you now, the central shelf, that is the complete opposite in that way. So the northern shelves, we haven't culled very many individuals and so on compared to the central shelf. And coming in then, having a look at reefs that goes from Cairns to Alley Beach. So we have Fitzroy up on top and down to Shrimp Reef that's a little bit below Townsville region there. On the left-hand side, we have the hard coral cover from manta tows, and you see that a lot of them, of the reefs that we have, are in the culling underway management mode. There's 3 of them that is in threshold achieved management mode, and 3 of them that are in proactive management mode in that way. But the coral cover is actually greater in overall. There's a few sites that are having less than 10%, but a lot of them have between 20 and 30%. On the right-hand side, we have number of Cots culled, and the same there. The blue is the smallest one, green was the second cohort, and red is the third cohort, and orange is the largest cohort. And we can see up towards Cairns area, we have quite a lot of small individuals in first and second cohort. And once we're coming down towards the trunk reef, we see that it's shifted a little bit, that we have a more equal distribution in Cots over the 4 cohorts. Whereas then when we're coming down to Townsville region and Big Broadhurst, that have actually changed, that a lot of the Cots are quite large. They are in group 3 and 4 rather than 1 and 2. So we still have quite a lot of 2s, I suppose, there, but much so less 1s. So it is a little bit of distinction between the northern part of the central down to the more southern part of our range in that way. In that, yeah, there seemed to be a little bit of shift in sizes. Having then a look at the manta tows, the rhesus, and the cull dive CPUE, we can see that on the first one is manta tows. The blue is still 0s, but we're coming up towards the 50% mark in some of the reefs that we are detecting Cots and Cots scars at these reefs in that way. And in rhesus, there is a clear increase in Cots activity on our rhesus. So we can see it's much more of them we found them at. And when we come into cull dive CPUE, in that way, we see there as well there that we have a lot more in the red, that's 0.04 or higher CPUE at many of the sites and many of the reefs. And some of the reefs we're only culling at that level compared to at northern reefs we were culling much less. And in much less dives that we have, where we have 0 Cots culled, I suppose. And we still have quite a large proportion of Cots at the cull between 0 or higher than 0, but less than 0.3 or 0.035 in that way. So there is a little bit of difference, and the big difference here is that the number of Cots culled, I suppose, in the northern parts was maximum 100 on one reef, whereas here we have the Big Broadhurst, we have about 4,500 instead. So it's a huge difference in culling effort that the divers have undertaken. And having a look then at a little bit of time spent and so on, and it's kind of interesting that we spent about 55% of the time culling 58% of the site, but only culled about 8% of the Cots. Versus when divers actually comes to sites that are having high proportion of Cots, they are really efficient in what they're doing, and they're culling a lot of Cots in a very short time. So here at the bottom part, we can see that at the level of or equal or higher than 0.04 is that 45% of the dive time was allocated to 42% of the dives, but they culled 92% of the Cots. So it's a huge increase in there. And so a few suggestions that have come out from a lot of discussions that we have in the meetings with operators and action group and so on is that reducing cull activities, I suppose, in some of the northern reefs where there are lower Cots numbers in that way. And also that Cots scar may not be a very useful indicator in some areas, and especially after they've already been successfully culled below the threshold in that way. And then maybe trying to look into more historical data as well, and having a look at where we have culled a lot of Cots, which part of the reef we have culled most Cots. Cots may not be over the entire reef. They might be congregated at certain aspects, and maybe go in there as establishing indicator sites or reference points at the reef to see if it's easier to spot them in the future in that way. So when we're coming back to reef after year in that way, we can maybe start at these points that are we have culled higher numbers of Cots previously. So, and also, big thank you to the operational team at Cots, to INLOC, because I'm not out there culling, although sometimes I say we, and it should be them only, because I actually haven't done any culling or any manta towing or any risk service in that way. I'm just the one building a few graphs in that way. So big thank you to INLOC teams, and they've done really good work up there. Thank you.